Welcome, everyone, to the PFF Fantasy Podcast IDP edition. I'm John Macri, and the Dynasty rankings continue to rock on here as we are still in June. Not quite 2025 fantasy draft season just yet, but we're not far now. So naturally, I'm going to continue to break down my Dynasty IDP rankings for a couple more episodes as we have two positions left, both on the defensive line. And today, the focus will be on the edge defenders. We have a lot of talent at the position to sort through. Some big, expensive, and important names in here, and I'll dive in how I've got them all ranked for Dynasty. So let's get it. All right, Dynasty edges, the one position I'd say where there are a little bit more reliable and stable metrics year to year that we can point to. And as many people might be surprised to hear, one of those metrics is surprisingly not like fantasy points or points per game. There are, many more key and predictive metrics that we can and probably should be relying on for this position. And I'll kind of touch on those as we go. And I think what I'll do at some point as well is I'll create a couple of YouTube like exclusive videos kind of covering the data and how it might affect some of our defensive linemen heading into 2025, maybe in the form of like positive and negative regression candidates. So stay tuned for that. But I will say that one metric that you'll probably hear me reference more than any other with defensive linemen is a metric that I created a few years back called expected sacks, as this has proven to be the most stable metric for defensive linemen year to year, but also the most predictive of future sacks. That's more than even like playing time, pass rush grade, win rate, pressure rate, and especially fantasy points. So if you're watching on YouTube right now, you can see the breakdown of edge metrics and their year-to-year correlations. I have them broken down by year-to-year underlying metrics in one table, in-season metrics and how they correlate to sacks in another. And then just a list of like fantasy football points per game for each of our fantasy football positions, including the offense. And you can see edges right down there at the bottom, just above the safety position, which is last. So be careful of trusting fantasy points too much for IDP, because as you can see, it is very different than the offensive side of the ball. Meanwhile, expected sacks is the clear winner in predicting one of the most unstable stats year to year, which is sacks. So I was really happy with how that kind of turned out, and it's something that I've used and have found success with. So you'll hear me reference it. Just not everybody's aware of what it is or how it works, but essentially, it's taking a lot of these key pass rush metrics and expected playing time and stuff like that, and building it into one single metric that has, like you could see on the screen here, has proven to be the most stable year to year, and then also the most predictive of in-season sacks. So now that I've kind of got that rationale here to lead us off, let's get into my dynasty rankings for the position so that I can discuss why I like each of these guys within the top 24 and how I have them separated here so that we can kind of build the best and most competitive long-term roster. Because I think that's something that can happen in dynasty drafts too, is favoring young players too much and skipping over some very productive vets. So I think I think for these ranks, I have an ideal balance of both types here. The strong veterans and the young guys that allow us to kind of stay competitive while also having a future beyond this season so that we can stay competitive. So let's start at edge 24, and I'll count down to edge 1, just as we have with the previous Dynasty Rankings episodes. And edge 24 for me is new Arizona Cardinals top edge defender Josh Sweat. So Josh Sweat just signed a very nice 4-year deal with Arizona to reunite with Jonathan Gannon, getting about $19 million per season, and he's just 27 years old. Now, there's going to be a lot of 27-year-old players on this list today because that is still a great age to get prime production and still count on that production for a few more seasons. So yes, 27 is a good age. It's not like running backs or even rock stars where these guys start dying off at 27. We can often still get solid production out of the good edges around this age. So don't panic. It's, again, not the same as the running back position. Edge defenders are much better and more reliable at this point in their careers. And then heading into last year, coming back to Sweat was one of my favorite positive regression candidates based on what he was able to do in 2023, which, yes, what he did in 2023 didn't result in sacks that season, especially compared to what he did in 2022. But his expected sack numbers were among the best players in the league in 2023, which told us that he should deliver in 2024. Now, he didn't play nearly as much as he did in 2023, but still delivered an additional 2 sacks from that season in 2024. He ranked top 20 at his position in sacks, and once again, allowing expected sacks to kind of be proven correct, right? So I love the contract in Arizona. It gives me a lot of confidence in Sweat as a player who can be a starter for us in IDP for a few more years. Like I said, he reunites with Gannon. He had that career year with in terms of sacks back in 2022, but also should play a ton as well, which really helps his floor. He ranked 83rd percentile for his position in tackles versus expected. So he's not that kind of boom bust type option. And we should expect solid consistency for him again this year. Okay, next up, an interesting name and not one that would typically fit the mold of like a top 24 edge in Dynasty for me based on just his stats and his metrics, but where I think there needs to be some wiggle room in how to project him going forward. He makes sense here, and that's Kavon Tibido of the New York Giants. Now, Tibbs has not really come anywhere close to living up to his top 5 NFL draft capital since 2022, and he's been really poor in pass rush metrics for most of his career. Now, he did have that 11.5 sack season in 2023, but that came almost entirely from just overall volume of playing time. And while Josh Sweat, he was one of my favorite positive regression players heading into last year, Thibodeau was one that I felt the opposite about and expected that, the negative regression, because as you could see on the screen here, he greatly outperformed his expected sack totals in 2023, more than anyone at the position that year. And that almost guarantees sack regression the following year. And it did. Now, you can add in that the team just spent the 3rd overall pick on Abdul Carter as well. So I think the writing is on the wall that Tibbs' time in New York is numbered. And I think even his playing time this season will almost certainly take a hit, because this was a player who, at his worst, was averaging 75% of the defensive snaps, if not more, which is a high number for a defensive lineman. So that's not going to be the case again this year. That being said, he's still just 24 years old and will 100% get a shot to start for a different team once he's done in New York. And it's not just possible that, he gets the playing time back, but there's still time for him to develop into a better pass rusher as well. So I wouldn't be surprised if in 2026 and beyond, he's able to kind of switch up this narrative a bit and give us more reason to be optimistic. But what keeps him as only edge 23 in the ranks right now is just everything that we've seen so far. So I guess even as I drop him in my ranks, I'm still cautiously optimistic for his future. Another player that I think there's still reason for optimism is my edge 22, Dallas Turner of the Minnesota Vikings. Now, Turner was a first-round pick, ultra athletic, obviously, but all signs coming out of college said that this is a player who will not hit the ground running regardless of landing spot, and he'll need time to cook at the next level, which, we touched on that point a ton with him last offseason. It's why he was behind Laytatu and Verse for me in the rookie rankings. So obviously, landing spot, it didn't help Turner's case playing behind a couple of high volume guys like Andrew Van Ginkel and Jonathan Gernard, but the pass rush metrics for when he was on the field still very much point to a project player who we need to remain patient with. And it's why I'm not taking him out of the top 24 for now, because that rookie season was fully expected from him. And it's only fair that we give him at least year 2 to show some solid progression in his underlying pass rush metrics, because there's definitely potential here. I think just given the draft capital and the athleticism, like, he's going to get opportunities to prove he can be an NFL starter, and that's often going to come with a lot of snaps. Now, that might not be this year, considering Van Ginkel and Gernard continue to be very good in their roles, but he's also just 22, so there's not really a rush here. So if/when he gets those opportunities, he doesn't necessarily need to be an elite pass rusher either, but he's the kind of player similar to like a Trayvon Walker, where with a lot of snaps, he can outperform his expected sack totals because of the athleticism and being able to kind of close and take advantage of cleanup opportunities. So could be a better IDP than NFL player. So that leaves me relatively optimistic that that's what he can become in his NFL career. And I'm fine holding him in IDP or buying low with the expectation, with that expectation in mind. So where I don't think he probably deserves to be higher than this is that it's not a guarantee to happen. We'll see, we see this happen just as much with like highly drafted athletic defensive linemen who didn't necessarily stand out in college. He scored a 7.69 prospect score in the edge prospect model when he was coming out of college, which is fine. It's a 78th percentile score, but the potential hit rate is not nearly as high as like the Verse and Latus of the world. So with that score for him, it's about 18% chance at top 24 for IDP, 36% for top 24, and 51% for top 36 of the position. So there's kind of both reason for optimism and reason to temper expectations enough to, to not go crazy with him in the ranks. And I'm still fine keeping him in this range at the same time. Okay, on to Edge 21 now. That's Nick Bonito of the Denver Broncos, who is coming off a massive season, a breakout year. He delivered 13 sacks, I think 2 defensive touchdowns, just 25 years old, came out of college with a really strong profile as well as a second-round pick. So now, where I think he doesn't necessarily crack the top 20 for me is that even as good as he was in terms of a lot of his, underlying metrics, he was still one of the year's kind of biggest overachievers, meaning that we should fully expect a regression season here in 2025 from Casa Bonito, because yes, he was edge 14 last year, which was great in IDP scoring. He wasn't being drafted anywhere near that range, and he ended up being a great value. But think of everything he had to do to get to that finish, which includes producing 6 sacks over expected, the most for any player at his position, and adding in like the 2 defensive touchdowns. And look, Bonito, he could still be very good this season, and I think he will be. Otherwise, he wouldn't be edge 21 for me in Dynasty. I just don't want anyone to kind of draft him expecting that level of production that we got from him last season, because it's very unlikely that it will happen again, even on a larger snap share, because he was at about 61% last season. So there's room for that to grow. But a 13 sack year with 2 touchdowns to finish as edge 14 in 2025 feels unlikely to repeat. And remember, the fantasy points correlation for the edge position that I presented at the top of the show, that won't help Bonito's case either for that happening. So you'll see where I have him ranked for redraft in a couple weeks from now, but I still like him enough to have him as edge 21 in Dynasty. Edge 20 for me is another young buck, and actually one that has yet to play an NFL snap just yet. And I know how much people love to stress out about that, but James Pierce Jr., first round pick for the Atlanta Falcons, is the guy for me here. So Pierce is not just a first round pick, because there were a few of them this year, but he is one of the best, I think, long-term IDP outlooks based on his prospect model score coming in at a 9.1. That puts him in a success rate bucket of 43% chance for top 12 at his position, 86% for top 24. You also consider like the investment that Atlanta made in him, especially spending 2 first round picks to get him, and the need that they have for a star pass rusher. Pierce is in as ideal of a situation to succeed as maybe any other rookie pass rusher in year 1. So he had elite pass rush metrics coming out of Tennessee, 95th percentile career pass rush grade, 96th percentile career win rate, 99th percentile career pressure rate, and his expected sack rate for his career was also 96th percentile. So everything that we should want in a first round pick, Pierce has, and then some. Like, he's also just 21 years old. So even if he doesn't come flying out of the gates as a rookie, there's so much runway for him to be a top IDP for us long term. And I think we should feel comfortable investing in him in Dynasty. Next up at edge 19, a player who we've long been comfortable with and probably can be for a little while longer, Denil Hunter of the Houston Texans. And look, while Pierce is one of the youngest players on this list, Hunter is one of the older ones, as he'll be turning 31 years old this season. So basically like a 10-year age gap. But like I said, at the top, we should not build our dynasty rosters based purely on age, and there still needs to be some nuance there. And for a player like Hunter, who's been as consistent and as effective as he's been for his career, he deserves to kind of be still in this top 20 consideration for Dynasty. The guy has just been really good, and he plays a ton of snaps, which always helps. He ranked 97th percentile in expected sacks last season. He owned a top 15 pass rush grade and overall PFF grade for the position. He ranked top 10 overall at the position in IDP scoring. You look at, some point the drop off is going to come for Hunter. I just don't necessarily think it's this season, and maybe not even next season if he continues to look as good, but it will happen at some point soon, which is why for Dynasty, at least, there's some reasons to temper expectations long term, though, he can easily be a reliable starter for us for a couple more years. Now, speaking of veterans with high-end consistency, edge 18 for me is Trey Hendrickson, who is coming off an amazing season, but is also in the midst of like this contract dispute, which kind of muddies things up for me, at least in how to project him going forward, and why he's kind of, I guess, only edge 18 in the rankings. Now, he is 30 years old as well, so that does play a part in trying to project just how much longer he can keep this going. That being said, what he is doing at this stage in his career is elite. He was 100th percentile in expected sacks last season. He earned a top 5 PFF pass rush grade, top 5 in IDP scoring at his position, back-to-back seasons with 17 and a half sacks. The dude has been unreal. Obviously, though, for the same reasons that we have to expect a drop-off at some point, like with Denil Hunter, it's hard to kind of put him too much higher on this list, especially with the contract stuff. Like, if Hendrickson sits out or misses time this year, like that's a massive blow, and one that could prove costly for where we'd be drafting him if we expected him to play this year. And that makes him a little bit more risky for me right now. I think either way, though, 2025 isn't necessarily going to even be another 17 and a half sack season. So there will be some regression there naturally, but then you take into account that he's also not like a strong tackler. So it makes him a little bit more boom bust. He ranked just 3rd percentile in tackles versus expected last year. And that's kind of been the norm for him, right? He's much more of a pass rush specialist, which can lead to inconsistent IDP production when he's not posting 17 and a half sacks. So all that said, still expect him to be a high-end pass rusher. So the upside is worth the investment, but I think we're now beyond the peak of what he can be for IDP. So that value has to start to decline a bit as well, right? Regardless of if he gets the contract stuff sorted out by week 1. All right, let's move to another youngin at edge 17 for me. This time it is Chop Robinson of the Miami Dolphins. So Chop is coming off an excellent rookie season where I think he probably had to be relied on maybe a little more than the team had originally planned for when they drafted him, because both Bradley Chubb and Jalen Phillips were unable to contribute almost at all last season, right? Chubb obviously didn't get on the field even once, while Jalen Phillips, unfortunately, just wasn't able to stay healthy again coming off injury. So that kind of pushed Chop into this larger role than what he likely would have had if both of those guys were in the lineup in year 1. And to his credit, he performed really well with his opportunities. He was 78th percentile in expected sacks. He was top 20 in pass rush grade as well. And he was a player coming out of college who was very similar to James Pierce Jr., who I just talked about, where he comes out of college with this really encouraging pass rush profile. And even though he's kind of lacking in like early down ability, there's enough in there, like in his pass rush metrics and draft capital, to kind of leave us encouraged about him. And I don't think anything in his rookie season really changed that, because basically the only thing that I really would temper expectations for with him, at least for this year, is just how healthy Chubb and Phillips will be, because if they are good to go, then they will almost certainly cut into Chop's snap share, right? And potentially keep him from kind of growing that year 1 role at the very least. So it sounds like Bradley Chubb is looking good. I know he was like player of the day or something like that from day 1 of training camp. We'll see what happens with Jalen Phillips in his recovery, but he's also practicing and taking part in drills. So that does probably have me lower on Chop for 2025, knowing that, but I still believe in him long-term for sure. Okay, one player who has been a long-term project for sure, and it is at least starting to show signs of development, which was as expected. That's Trayvon Walker coming in as edge 16 for me in the Dino ranks. Now, Walker, he still hasn't been amazing or on par with a lot of the guys that I'm going to mention in this range, but that's I think what's really helped him is his overall playing time, because one thing that Jacksonville clearly has wanted to do is make sure they get their money's worth with this guy and play him basically until the wheels fall off or until he develops into the player they think he could be. He ranked 4th in defensive snaps for the position last year, 2nd in pass rush snaps. He rarely came off the field. And that's why he was primarily able to produce 10 sacks in back-to-back seasons. And that was the case in 2023 as well, where he played a ton. And that has been great for his IDP value because it allows for at least a decent production floor as he falls into tackles and sacks without having the high-end pass rush metrics. And even with this past year being like his best season in terms of those underlying metrics, that's still resulted in just a 65.1 pass rush grade, which ranks 68th at the position. Though, with his snaps and the other metrics built in, he ranked 86th percentile in expected sacks, which definitely helps his ranking here as edge 16. And the expectation for Walker as well coming out of college was that he would be more of a long-term project and not show those high-end metrics right away, where we should at least start to see those signs in year 3 and year 4 as the range where he should and can start to deliver. And to his credit, he did at least take a step forward last year, which is how he remains a fringe top 15 guy for Dynasty for me. But if we don't see a big step forward in year 4, that's where I start to become a little bit more concerned, and we'll probably start to drop him in the rankings because he's had plenty of opportunities, and year 4 is that exact range where most of like the first round edges either deliver or prove that they're not ever going to get there. And so if this is not the year, then I don't know if Walker ever becomes that like top 20 NFL talent that he was drafted to be with the first overall pick. I think he'll continue to get opportunities beyond this season, regardless of where he plays, because that's just the nature of being an athletic freak first round pick. So that mitigates some of the risk at valuing him this high in dynasty rankings. But if he's ever going to be more valuable than he was last year, then we have to see a lot more in year 4 of his NFL career. Okay, on to the top 15 now, and leading us off is another one of those 27-year-olds, and a very good one. That's Jonathan Gernard of the Minnesota Vikings. Now, last year was a great year for Gernard in terms of his underlying metrics in Brian Flores' defense. He ranked 99th percentile in expected sacks, so a great sign going forward that he can continue to be in that double-digit sack range, which he has been in each of the past 2 seasons. And he's another guy that his defense relied on pretty heavily last season. He played a ton of snaps on the edge, delivered strong tackle totals, and all of his pass rush metrics say that his production should be more sustainable than even his teammate, Andrew Van Ginkel, who maybe is noticeably absent from this list for some of you, but I'll be putting out a video on regression candidates, like I said, soon, and I hope that will explain Andrew Van Ginkel's absence in the top 24 Dynasty edge ranks for me, and why he may even come in lower in redraft as well. But back to Gernard, I have less concerns with him. He's got a nice contract there. He fit in perfectly in Flores' defense. I don't know why anyone would expect a lesser role for him this year, even with like Dallas Turner waiting in the wings, right? So Gernard feels like probably the safest and best bet on the Minnesota defensive line. And I imagine that that'll be the case for the next few seasons as well, so as we kind of wait for Turner to develop. Okay, next up at edge 14 for me is Josh Hines-Allen of the Jacksonville Jaguars, the best Jacksonville defensive lineman. Even if he has a few years on Trayvon Walker in age, JHA is still, I think, the Jacksonville's best pass rusher that I want the most, both in Dynasty and probably in redraft as well. Now, Allen obviously had that massive 2023 season with 17 and a half sacks. He was great then, but he was great last year as well. Even though he didn't get 17 and a half sacks, I think we're all well aware of how unstable sacks are at this point. If you've been listening to this channel long enough, it's not something that I think gets baked into analysis on pass rushers enough, because I hear so much reference to like actual sacks and fantasy points, but like I laid out earlier, those are 2 of the more unreliable year-to-year metrics for the position. Meanwhile, Josh Hines-Allen expected sack numbers last year ranked 94th percentile for the position. So he's in a great spot there. He was a top 10 player in pass rush grade. He plays a hefty workload. So even though he had a lower production floor last year, because he ranked 22nd percentile in tackles versus expected, that is a number that we could see bounce back given his playing time. I really like Josh Hines-Allen, even for Dynasty at 27 years old as well. That magical number, unless you're a rock star. But no, this is a high-end player for the position, and one that I think will continue to kind of keep himself in the conversation going forward. So I'm fine valuing him as a top 15 edge in Dynasty and potentially even redraft this season. Okay, up next, a player that I'm very optimistic about heading into year 2 of his career here in 2025. My edge 13 is Laytatu Lu of the Indianapolis Colts. And man, the discourse around Latu's rookie year, I have found to be really kind of frustrating and uninformed. And that's been true since in season last year, where he was getting shit on for IDP. But what the hell were the expectations for a rookie edge rusher right out the gate? Like, did we expect him to be like a locked in IDP starter? No, not really, not at all, really. So does he still have that potential going forward? 100%, right? And I think considering how well he played in year 1, it's very encouraging and should not be seen as a disappointment, because he ranked 74th percentile in expected sacks. He was 32nd in pass rush grade as well, and a 71.5 overall PFF grade. Like, that's really nice for a rookie, even if it's not the ultra rare Jared Verse level performance that is an unfair bar to set for any rookie. But I think when I did the full Dynasty rankings episode, like before free agency, I compared Latu's numbers to like Trayvon Walker, and Laytatu was better across the board. So he's already further ahead in his career than somebody like Trayvon Walker as well, who was just a top 12 IDP edge for us, right? So there's a lot of reason to be optimistic here about Laytatu heading into year 2. Like, he should only play a larger role, but you also consider his sacks versus expected totals coming in below expectations. There's room for natural positive regression there as well, along with the increased playing time and development as a young first round player who scored very highly in the prospect model. But the upside of him being a top 12 IDP for us at some point soon still very much exists, and is a lot more likely for Laytatu than some other young players in the league. So yes, I'm going to be high on Laytatu for a lot of reasons, and he's someone that I'll probably talk about quite a bit as we get closer to the season. I think we'll be talking breakouts here in a few weeks, and spoilers, Laytatu will absolutely be on my list. So go buy Laytatu for cheap if you can in Dynasty leagues, and expect much more from him going forward, and you'll see how quickly this rookie season production concerns kind of disappear. Okay, on to the top 12 now. And at edge 12 for me is the second of 3 Giants edge defenders on the list today. This time it's Brian Burns. So Burns' first season with the Giants resulted in his best season as a pass rusher since 2020. That led to an edge 3 finish for IDP, top 12 in pass rush grade, 93rd percentile in expected sacks as well, which gives me a lot of hope for him heading into year 7 of his career at, get this, 27 years old. So Burns has been especially consistent throughout his career, which has been really nice for returning the IDP value that we invest in him each year, even if that hasn't always been high-end consistency. But for the most part, he's at the very least an above average player for his position, both in the NFL and for IDP. And I don't expect that to change much here in 2025. He played a ton last year with the Giants, which really helped his tackle production. He ranked 95th percentile in tackles versus expected. So if we continue to get that usage for Burns, even if it's slightly less with Abdul Carter in the picture, I think Carter affects Thibodeau much more than it affects Burns. So I'm happy with him as edge 12 right now. Okay, edge 11, still currently 27 years old, though he will be turning 28 before week 1. And it's another one of those very reliable IDP starters, like a Denil Hunter, like a Trey Hendrickson, but one who I think is still very, very undervalued and underrated still at this point in his career, Alex Highsmith of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, Highsmith got banged up last year and missed some time, so I think that has played a part in him kind of flying under the radar this season, but that has not been the norm for his career. And when he's out there, he is one of the best edges in the league. He was my dark horse for edge 1 last offseason, and obviously missed time kind of hurt that, but edge 7 in points per game. So he was technically an edge 1 while he was active. So am I considering that a win? You're goddamn right I am. I make the rules here, damn it. But no, this is still very much still an elite player at the position for the NFL and for IDP. I don't think he gets enough credit for that. You look at last year, 90th percentile in expected sacks per game, which I like to reference for players who miss time, but also 89.7 pass rush grade, 79.7 run defense grade, 89.5 PFF grade, all top 10 marks at the position. And that has been the norm for him in each of the past two seasons, which I don't think people realize. Like, he had this massive 2022 season with 14 and a half sacks and didn't hit as high marks in 2023, but his expected sack totals were actually even better in 2023. So it pointed to a player with positive regression, coming down the pipeline. And if not for missed time last year, he likely would have delivered on that, because even with 200 fewer pass rush snaps last year than he had the year before, he was just one sack short of his 2023 total. So there's room for a big year in 2025 and beyond. He's a workhorse as well. He averages no worse than 74% of the defensive snaps in each of the past 4 years. Usually it's much higher than that. That's been a big help to his floor because he's an elite tackler as well. He was 93rd percentile in tackles versus expected, even with the missed games. So I can't stress enough how good of an IDP value Highsmith continues to be, and someone that we should invest highly in regardless of the dynasty build. Even if he's 28 years old, there are several more kind of IDP relevant seasons that we can get from Highsmith with great upside, considering the pass rush ability and the elite playing time as well. Okay, at edge 10, I've got Buffalo Bills' Greg Russo, who was on the breakout list last year, and he absolutely delivered on that in 2024. Now, a big reason that I wrote up Russo as one of my favorite breakouts for the position heading into last season came down to one, expected sacks. He scored strongly there in 2023, came in below expected in his actual sacks. So there was this combination of both improvement as a player and positive sack regression to go along with that. And the other part of it was that his playing time was on the rise heading into last year, which was part of the concerns for him in previous seasons, right? But he hit another new high in snap rate last year, going from 60% in 2023 to 71% in 2024, sorry. So very happy that I was not just right about the Greg R breakout, but happy about how good he looks as an IDP option kind of going forward, because even with the breakout IDP season where he finished as a top 10 edge and 94th percentile in expected sacks, there's still potentially room for improvement in the sack column. He came in 1.5 sacks below expected last year. He hasn't hit double-digit sacks yet in a season, and I think we can still get those types of seasons out of him, especially considering, like I said, he was 94th percentile score in expected sacks, but also 13th at his position in pass rush grade as well. So I think he has a chance for a better year in the sack column this season. And if he continues to be like a high-end tackler as well, where he was 89th percentile in tackles versus expected last season, Russo could be in for another top 10 IDP finish this season. So I'm optimistic about him, and just 25 years old, 4 years into the league. My God, like, this guy is still young AF. So really like Greg Russo. Okay, I literally just talked about the Pittsburgh Steelers edge defender Alex Highsmith minutes ago, and now I have to talk about his teammate TJ Watt at edge 9. Now, I understand that for everything that TJ Watt has been for IDP and in the NFL, edge 9 might be too low, but at the same time, he's going to be turning 31 years old this season, so that potential drop-off is bound to happen sooner rather than later. Like, his pressure rate last year took a huge hit, so there's a little bit of signs, which at least for me, like, he's in this conversation, like same kind of conversation with Trey Hendrickson, Denil Hunter, who are, by the way, much lower on this list, where we should only expect maybe a few more seasons of high-end play. Though the reason that Watt is much higher than them is because he's not just the high-end play, but like top tier level every single year. And again, last year as well. So 96th percentile in expected sacks, top 6 in pass rush grade, run defense grade, PFF grade, top 5 in IDP scoring and points per game. Like, the guy continues to produce at a very high level. So I wasn't going to move him lower than this, but there's also all these names that I'll have higher that I also really like a lot and a little bit more long-term. So look, feel free to rank them as you like. It's super close among this group. But for now, TJ Watt is edge 9 for me. We'll see what happens with this contract dispute stuff for him as well, but ultimately don't think it's going to be a huge deal. Okay, as much as I think the Steelers have the best defensive line in football, that fan base is probably still going to hate me, because just ahead of TJ Watt, I have Myles Garrett at edge 8. And again, rank this top 8 to 9, however the hell you please. I think there's an argument for any order that you like here, and I'm not going to flip out either way. That being said, Myles Garrett comes in at 8 for me because very similar to TJ Watt, where even though he's getting a little bit older, albeit still younger than Watt, he is still an elite pass rusher. He ranks second in pass rush grade last year. Excuse me. Second overall grade, top 10 in run defense grade, edge 6 in IDP, 98th percentile in expected sacks, and he's hitting those marks every single year. The guy is just unreal. And when you consider the elite upside, he remains super valuable for IDP with week winning potential every single week. Like, I don't know what else to say about Garrett here. He just signed a big new contract as well. The guy's an absolute freak. I could see him being an elite pass rusher for several more seasons, even potentially longer than Watts still. So that was kind of the tiebreaker for me. Okay, edge 7 for me. The man whose jersey is hanging up behind me here, signed, by the way, shout out Jake Colhagen, the legendary Max Crosby, another 27-year-old, by the way. Guys, if you're listening to this and you're 27 years old and I think you're an elite company, I hope life is going as well for you as it is many of these top 24 edges. So cheers to you all. But back to the man, Max Crosby, unfortunately had to miss time last season due to injury, which I'm of the belief that maybe, he would have played through it if the Raiders weren't complete ass, because even with people doubting like the sustainability of his snap shares after he played like 96% and 95% of snaps in each of the past 2 seasons, when he was active last year, he averaged 97%. So the guy is an absolute maniac, and I fully expect him to bounce back this season and play a hefty workload once again. Again, as I like to highlight for players who miss time, Max still ranked 96th percentile in expected sacks per game. He was the edge 6 in points per game. We know the floor is going to be strong here considering the playing time. Do we really expect Max to disappoint again this season? Or would you think he would reestablish himself as a top tier player at the position? I'd say it's the latter. And for me, that keeps the expectation high in Dynasty as well as my edge 7. All right, the newest name on this list is rookie Abdul Carter to complete the trifecta of Giants defensive linemen and arguably the best Dynasty asset of the bunch. So obviously, 3rd overall pick in this year's draft. That alone creates high expectations. But more importantly, his college resume backs that up as he owns an elite prospect profile coming out, scored a 9.31 prospect model score, which was 99th percentile. He ranked no worse than 95th percentile in every career pass rush metric coming out as well. So he's in this ideal bucket of prospects that, like I mentioned with James Pierce, has a very strong chance of being a weekly IDP starter with higher upside at the very least, but potentially even better than Pierce considering the prospect score. Now, year 1, I think we can temper expectations enough like we would with any rookie defensive lineman, but specifically for Carter, the reasons being potential playing time, right? I wouldn't be surprised if he starts the year behind both Burns and Thibodeau, but I do expect him to overtake a starting role, especially over Thibodeau sooner rather than later. And once he's there, there's no turning back. Like, he should be in that high-end IDP territory once we see that workload come to fruition, along with the pass rush ability. Plus, he's 21 years old and no doubt will be an IDP relevant name for a very long time. So I'm perfectly fine valuing him in this range considering the long-term projection. All right, speaking of young players who came out of college with elite prospect profiles, although everyone basically from this point going forward had an elite college profile, but one that only has one NFL season under his belt so far, a super encouraging first NFL season, albeit that's edge 5 for me, Jared Verse. So Verse only managed 4.5 sacks as a rookie, but everything he did on a play-to-play basis points to a top 10 player at his position, which makes for a very strong long-term projection, right? He ranked 96th percentile in expected sacks. So that means he came in 5.6 sacks below expected, making him arguably the greatest positive regression candidate for the 2025 season. He ranked top 10 in PFF grade, top 10 in run defense grade, top 10 in pass rush grade. He ranked 97th percentile in tackles versus expected. He averaged 75% of the team's weekly defensive snaps. He finished as the overall edge 13 with just 4.5 sacks. That is hard to do. So heading into 2025, we're absolutely projecting for a better year in the sack column, right? Like, we're not expecting his snap share to get worse than 75%, which is already excellent. He's proven to be a high-end tackler, so he'll make the most of that snap share. Top 10 player at his position as a rookie. Like, even if he is, even better in year two, then I don't know how we can possibly temper expectations for Verse heading into 2025 and beyond as well. Like, I don't know who I'd move out of the top four just yet to get Verse in there, but I can definitely see him being higher on this list at this point next year. No doubt about that. But let's get into that top four now, starting with the edge four, Will Anderson of the Houston Texans, another young gun who has now put together two really good NFL and IDP seasons to create, I think, a lot of excitement around him and what his long-term potential could still be. He just came through with an 11 sack season despite missing some time last year. But after a defensive rookie of the year season in 2023 as well, he ranked top 10 at his position in PFF grade. He ranked top 25 in run defense grade, or top 15, sorry, in run defense grade, and top 25 in pass rush grade. And he was 78th percentile in expected sacks. So he did that, he did outperform his expected sack totals by a fair bit, which has me at least slightly concerned about regression for this season. That being said, though, it's not like we've necessarily seen the best of Will Anderson either, right? Like, again, just 23 years old, elite college prospect profile. Year 3 to 4, I think the expectation for Anderson to consistently rank among the top 10 at his position in pass rush metrics and for IDP is very fair. And if that happens, which I think it will, how can he not be a top 5 dynasty asset, right? Like, if it doesn't happen and that regression does hit, then maybe it is Anderson that I swap out for Verse. Only time will tell, but I don't think you could go wrong with anyone really in this top 5 to 10 or top 9, whatever it is. So yeah, really like Will Anderson, but yeah, the optimism continues here with our next player on the list and our final 27-year-old on the list, the animal, Nick Bosa. I mean, what else is there to say? Like, even if you don't agree that he should be higher in Dynasty than the younger guys like Anderson and Verse, it's still hard to argue like that everything that Nick Bosa has accomplished to this point in his career, both for the NFL and IDP, and still has plenty of time to continue with that elite production as well at just 27 years old. Even last year, he missed a small chunk of games, but because of the elite level of play, he still finished as edge 7 overall for IDP. He was edge 3 in points per game. He ranked 92nd percentile in expected sacks. He was 94th percentile in expected sacks per game, 87th percentile in tackles versus expected, top 10 PFF grades across the board. I don't know how we can possibly doubt Nick Bosa at this point. Like, the sack numbers have been surprisingly quiet in back-to-back seasons after his Defensive Player of the Year season in 2022 when he had 18 and a half sacks. All that says to me is that he's due for another blow-up season, and I fully believe that will happen in 2025, especially for a 49ers defense who I expect to bounce back after a down year last year. They'll be a motivated group, and Bosa is going to be a massive part of that. So 15 to 18 sacks is well within his realm of possibilities in 2025, and he's going to be ranked very highly in my redraft rankings. We'll talk about that when the time comes. But I also feel the same about my next player here. The next two really, I think, can have massive years. But edge 2 for me is Micah Parsons of the Dallas Cowboys. There is obviously a theme here with these top guys: elite pass rusher, high-end IDP production, top-tier consistency. Parsons checks all of those boxes: 96th percentile in expected sacks and 99th percentile in expected sacks per game, because he did miss a chunk of time. But he also had a 6th overall PFF grade, 4th overall PFF pass rush grade, top 5 in IDP points per game. Like, even without the high-end tackling last year, like, he still delivered another great IDP season. 14 sacks has kind of been his career high so far, but would anyone be shocked if he too has that blow up year as soon as this year and pushes for that 20 sack mark like so many of his elite peers have already done? I wouldn't be surprised at all. I think he's a threat to do that every single season. And at just 26 years old, like, there's still plenty of room for him to return to this edge 2, dynasty value for a long time. Bringing us to the final name on the list, my edge 1, a player whose jersey I would have as my next one on the wall behind me if I wasn't a poor. It's Aiden freaking Hutchinson of the Detroit Lions. Now, forget about the injury from last year for a minute and think about what he was doing prior. And then I'll let you factor in some regression in those numbers coming off the injury. And you might still find that he is an elite player at his position. So last year, 95.0 PFF pass rush grade. That was first among all players, all positions. 94.9 overall grade last year, first among all players, all positions. 38.3% pass rush win rate, first among all players, all positions, ahead of Myles Garrett in second by over 15 percentage points. 0.89 expected sacks per game, the highest mark among all players at all positions. 22.5 IDP points per game, first among all players at all positions by over 3 points per game. And this isn't some one-year anomaly either. In 2023, he was top 5 at his position in PFF pass rush grade, win rate, led the position in expected sacks again. So throw out the small sample size stuff, because we were about to witness an incredible year from Hutch, to the point where he was going to be, I think, unanimous defensive player of the year, probably lead the league in sacks, beat IDP 1, all of that. Now, unfortunately, the injury stopped that from happening. But this isn't a player who I can see being kept down from injury for too long. Like, even if he's not back to 100% right out the gate and it takes him some time to post those elite numbers again, he's 24 years old still. Like, we're not doing a 2025 ranking only. This is for Dynasty. Every player is going to have to deal with injuries at some point. And the belief here is that Hutch's worst is now behind us, and we can get behind him going back to the producing those incredible IDP numbers sooner rather than later. And for that, there was just no way I was taking him out of my edge 1 spot. If you're scared or worried about the injury and how it affects him for the rest of his career, then sure, rank him lower. I get it, but I'll happily invest in Hutch and can't wait to see him back on the field this season. All right, guys, that's it. We're wrapped on the top 24 IDP Dynasty edges for this 2025 offseason. As always, you can check out the full top 300 for IDP on the pff.com rankings page, which houses any and all updates. And I'll probably release one more updated article version as well before the season, just so those changes are accounted for in there as well. But next week, we'll do one more Dynasty rankings episode, the top 24, or we'll see how many, but top Dynasty defensive tackles, which I'm looking forward to showing, some love to those big guys on the interior of the defensive line. So I hope you'll tune in for that. But until next time, peace out.